Hi, welcome to Quirky Queen's Journals. My name's Kirsten. So I'm doing a little series of abstracts today. This is cradled wood panels and I am applying gesso just to seal them. I got 12 of these panels for £15 on Amazon and they are 4.7 inch square each. So this is a China pencil and I'm just doing some random pencil marks. I like to do this to start the composition off. Then I'm going to turn them so that the lines are not connecting anymore. Just to try and treat them individually, I'm kind of combining them and then I'm switching them round. And then I'm going to go over those lines with the China marker again, using my left hand and trying to move quite slowly so as to keep the line as wonky as possible. And I'm also bringing each of the lines out past the edge of the board. And the reason I'm choosing to use a China marker is because it's permanent and it will not smear when wet. So I'm liking, the division on the panels so far. I think that most of them have been divided quite nicely into a third and 2/3. I'm also going to keep the colour palette for this very simple. I'm just sticking with black and white with burnt umber. One of the umbers, translucent raw umber I think it is, acrylic ink. And I use pyrole red and yellowish green acrylic paints as my kind of colours. This could also easily be done on canvas or paper. However, I liked the kind of hardness of the board when I was pressing against it with like the paintbrush or the pencils. I felt it was... that in itself made me do the marks in a certain way because of how it felt. And this is just a palette knife and I'm putting on some black heavy body acrylic paint with it. Yeah, because see with the canvas, it can be quite bouncy. And the paper, there is part of you that's always trying to protect the paper from the paint because you know that it can only handle so much before it starts warping or tearing. And again, I'm just using the palette knife to bring the ends of these black lines towards the edges of the palette. No, the board. It's a palette knife. So I'm just turning them again so that they disconnect from each other. It does get harder as you go on, trying to make sure they don't connect with each other. Even though that one that I'm touching just now has two very straight lines on it, there's something about it I like a lot. It's not a composition I would normally start with. So I'm just going to let these dry. That black paint is very thick in areas, so it wasn't as dry as it could have been. There was a couple of areas that unfortunately I smudged it. So that's just more black paint and I've put it onto some tissue paper and then I'm using that to transfer onto the boards just to apply it in a different way. It's exactly the same paint that I used with the palette knife, but I'm hoping that the way that I spread it out in the gel plate and then picking it up with the tissue paper, and in fact the tissue paper is quite crumpled, that it transfers in a different way to the boards. It's just to add interest. It's like mark making. It's like trying, black's a big feature on here, and I'm trying to apply the black in different ways. And it's actually quite nice to look at them and realise that at this stage, obviously we put white gesso on, but everything else that has been put on is black, but yet you can still see there's a lot of variety in each of the boards themselves. Obviously there's a lot of different ways to approach an abstract painting, and one of my preferred methods is that starting without a plan, trying to get a very strong, bold composition right at the start and then use that to build on. I also like having lots of variety, contrast. I like bold, simple shapes. And I like opposites as well. So black and white are opposites. So for me, that's a, great colour combination. I really like using complementary colours. So I will have a full supply list in the description box. And whilst I don't show every board being painted, I do show every technique and every type of layer that I'm making. So this is the translucent raw umber acrylic ink by Liquitex that I'm using, and I'm just splashing it about just now, just seeing where it lands. And then what I'm going to do is make a feature of it. So some of those splashes I leave as splashes, but other ones I use to sort of colour an area. So we've got the more kind of faded, solid look, and then we've got the random, blurry, intense but smaller with the raggedy edges, the splashes. And I just like that combination between the two types of paint marks, the droplets and then the faded out solid colours. So the board in the top left hand corner, the black paint wasn't quite dry and I smudge it here. What I do is I end up just trying to make it as if it is part of the, part of the plan. That was meant to happen. I just kind of bring the black and the brown together a bit more, as if they're kind of graduating in and out of each other. And that's just a bit of tissue paper to try and mop up some of the excess black. So I like doing a few pictures at once because you're less precious. You can kind of experiment on a couple of them and see what you think. And it's also nice to see the different ways. You're using the same techniques, the same methods, the same paints, etc., etc., but how they can all turn out very different. I do like that shade of brown. I'm also trying to, although I'm trying to create a kind of solid area of the colour, I am trying to not hold on to the board so that there is a lack of control over the paintbrush. My intention was to keep these neutral, but I find it very hard. I love bright colours and I find myself always drawn to them because I always feel like the painting isn't finished if I've not added in bright colours. Now this is glazing medium, and I was putting this on just to create some areas where the paint would behave differently on top of it. In this case, I'm not sure that it really made much of a difference, but in other paintings it can make a difference because it creates quite a smooth surface, and I find that it's easy to remove the paint from on top of it, and it just leaves like a sort of stain of it. And it's maybe because these are boards, maybe that works better on paper, but it was worth a try. I also like trying to find divisions in the painting. So when you made lines, it's almost like that's like a wall around an area. That's how I think of it. I like when you're adding collage or other media, you know, for example, when I was adding on the black transfer on the tissue paper, I was doing it to make a partnership with the black palette knife line work that was there. And when I add collage, I like to just find something, whether it's a matching colour, a matching line, something that just connects them. I'm not a big fan of just putting it on randomly without it serving some connecting purpose. It's almost like if I connect it to something, then it feels right. And I don't know if that's the right approach or not. It's just the approach I take. It's the one I feel comfortable with. So this is Pyrole Red Golden Fluid Acrylic Paint. And I love this Pyrole Red. It's quite an opaque colour as well. It's like fire engine red, isn't it? It's almost more red than primary red is, if that makes sense. But it really did bring these little pictures to life, didn't it, adding that in? I think it matches well with the raw umber. So what I'm doing is I'm taking off the excess paint with the tissue paper. This will help flatten it. It will spread it out slightly, and it will also help it dry a lot faster. So normally at this stage I would have a lot more colour on. I tend to start off with colour normally, but it's been nice doing it this way because it makes you aware of other things that are not colour. For example, how you're applying the paint, the differences in the lines as well. And I think it makes the shapes look bolder and simpler. They make more impact than they would if I'd made them with colours. That's how I feel about these. So that when I do add the colour is, you know, it's very meaningful because it's not in amongst a lot of other colours. And I only use this plus a yellowish green. So what I'm doing here is I've added some flow improver from Winsor & Newton. It's a medium, a clear medium. It costs £10 in the range, but it lasts a long time. I've added that into the Pyrole Red and it makes it more liquidy. Now you could just use water. You don't need to use this flow improver. It's just, I've got in the habit of using it now and I like it. But I'm using it to make the paint more fluid and to create drips. I like that most of the line work is quite wonky and the drips are quite you know, the line's quite a sharp line that the drips make. Unfortunately, I keep holding it close to myself when I'm doing this, and I apologise. I just keep banging it off the table because they're cradled boards. You can actually bang them quite heavily. I think the drips fit in well with the splashes of raw umber as well. I'm also making a decision in what direction I want the drips to go. So you can see here, it's all going to be contained in that bottom left corner. However, some of them, the drips have been, you know, coming down the whole length of the panel. Just adding in more of the fluid to help the drips. I like it as well when like one or two of the drips come off the edge and then one or two drips don't. I think that's a nice combination. They are very slow moving. You could spray water at them, but you've got much less control about where they're going. And also you won't just get them in one direction, they'll go in different directions. So I'm going to use that red tissue paper as collage paper. But first, I'm going to do what I did before and put tissue paper on top of the drips, just to remove the excess paint, flatten it out a bit, give a bit of variety in the opacity as well. And obviously help it dry faster. It's like a jellyfish, that one in the bottom left hand corner. Oh, I'm just adding in some white first. So what happens is, when you're creating these paintings, you get areas that are very chaotic and areas that are a bit empty. And it's about finding the balance between the chaos and the quietness. And so I find that white paint or black paint, or really any sort of colour that doesn't remove the area that's been painted completely but pushes it into the background by muting it, I really like that aspect of abstract painting. I like it when you can see it's a quiet area, but you can see that there's something going on underneath. Now this paintbrush I'm using is just, it's basically a useless paintbrush. It's so hard to control. It's thin. The head on it's quite small, but the bristles have got a mind of their own. They kind of go in different directions, and so I quite liked using it for that very reason, because it meant that I could really try and control it a lot more, but there's still that aspect of it, that random aspect to it. So this is me adding in the, oh no, we're not doing the red collage yet. We're on the book pages. So I collage a book page onto each, and I've chosen two books, and the pages are both very yellow. One of them is mostly numbers and kind of graphs, and the other one is text. I really like the placement of this one and the text in the diagram on the page. Now, what you don't see in this video is the amount of decision making that I do. I mean, there's more off camera than on camera, if you like, because it takes a long time to decide where things are going to be put. Because it's not just about working in the individual picture, it's about them all working together as well. Because my plan is to put these on the wall as a set. Now this one here that I'm working on just now, it's really quite untidy all around that book page. And some of that needs to go, because the chaotic parts are my favourite parts. But if the whole thing's chaos, then you lose it, you don't see. When you've got little bits of the chaos, it really highlights them. It makes them look interesting. It tells a better story. So the majority of these, when I was placing them, it was to actually add another shape, another, connection within the pictures themselves. This one I'm working on just now, it was more about creating another division on the page, because I felt the composition wasn't very strong there. Whereas now, I think it's highlighted the kind of under the red arch area. It can be hard knowing where to put the collage paper. That one in the middle, the bottom middle, with the vertical book page going up the left side, I very much made the decision to mimic the China marker pencil line that's on the other side of it. So for me, that was just about enhancing what was already there, reinforcing the visual language, rather than adding a new shape or, changing the composition. So the collages can serve different purposes. Now this is a soft pastel. I'm not sure what this colour is, but I chose it because it felt very close to being raw umber. And what I'm doing is I'm putting on one kind of sharp line, and then I'm putting on a sort of sketchy area where I'm using the side of it. And what I'm doing is the line work that I'm putting in, it's to sort of extend a line that's already there, or sort of close a loop. And the rubbing area, when I rub it on the side, that's just to create a sort of a quiet area, a quiet dark area, add a bit of balance. So I'm going over all these with water because soft pastels react to to wetness. So at least this way I'm controlling what's happening to it, and it does dry in very matte, and it also dries in with the different levels of opacity to it. So it's not just a solid block colour. There's a lot of variety in that solid block. So I think as well, this soft pastel and the book pages work very well together. And I think that we've got a lot of varieties in the way that colour has been applied here. So that's given us a lot of different textures. The black palette knife, you know, we've got quite sharp outlines on that. We've got texture in the middle of that. The book page is very flat and a solid colour. And the soft pastel has got lots of different varieties in it. So this is white acrylic ink, and I'm basically mimicking what I did with the soft pastel. I'm either creating a new shape or a new outline, or I'm enhancing one that was already there. And then what I do is when it meets up to another line is I'm trying to make it a bit more gradual between the white and the line that it's meeting, so that it's not very stark, the change in the line work. And I'm just doing what I did before, taking off the excess with the tissue paper, because that creates, you know, a more interesting edges to the lines, and it gives it a flatter look, and it helps it dry faster, and also it changes the opacity in some areas. Some areas underneath that white are now more visible than they were when it was just applied. Now this is a hog hair fan brush, so it's quite a stiff fan brush, and what's happened is some of that soft pastel wasn't dry and I've blended it together, which was not my intention, but we'll fix that after. So I'm kind of fanning it all out as if it's coming from a midpoint. So I'm fanning it all out towards the edges. I'm not sure it added much, and I'm not sure that I particularly liked it, but it was nice to try, and I just wanted to have a bit of movement in it. I felt that would give a bit of movement, but it was a bit of a boring movement. So that's that red jelly print that I made earlier on that I am using on the pictures. So mostly I'm trying to connect it to other red. I'm trying to be aware of the shape that I'm making as well. And what I'm doing here is that white acrylic ink line at the top, I've torn that in such a way to try and mimic that line, so that it's almost as if the white is the same shape, slightly above it. That was the idea anyway. I do like mimicking other stuff that's in the picture, that's been put on in different ways. Oh, it took me ages to decide on that one. But I think that worked really well, because on that bottom left we've got a really nice quiet corner All the chaos is in the bottom right corner, and it's quite structured at the top. Not sure why I put that one there. Now this one that I'm holding in my hand just now, this one was quite, I found this one a struggle to try and get balance on and bring it together in an interesting way. It's just like big blocks of colour, really. I'm also not sure what sort of mood overall that I get from these, but when I add the yellowish green, there's definitely a happy, vibrant vibe that comes from them. I wouldn't say that they look like they've got a lot of movement, but I do think there's a simplicity and a boldness to the shapes that matched in well with the two very bright colours that I used. So what I'm doing now is, this is black acrylic ink, and this is finishing touches. I'm very much trying to just finish off the composition, try and see where, that one there's a lot of curving in it, and I obviously felt like it would benefit from having some straight lines. So again, the choices are just based on what shapes are there already. How empty is it? Do we need to add something quite detailed? Do we need a focal point? Do we need a quiet area? Do we need a division? Do we need more curves? Do we need more, vertical lines, horizontal lines? I was really just looking at them all individually and just thinking, what can I do to finish this off? It's not even just about, like, for example, on the left column, that one in the middle that I'm working on right now, that one to me is not, it's not great. So that one is probably more about trying to repair it and do what you can with it. But there's other ones that you're wanting to really bring to life. So we're just doing lots of drips again. When I say lots of drips, it's not lots. We're just doing lots of banging to create the drips. So one of these I end up with too many drips. It looks very untidy. The top right hand corner, that one, and I actually put a bit of red collage back over that there. So the ink's dried now, the black ink, and this is me using the yellowish green heavy body acrylic paint. Now this is semi-opaque, and I have added in some of the float improver, which will make it more translucent. Obviously you could just use water. So what I'm doing here is that I'm trying to go around the red, but the edges of that red collage paper are torn, and I don't want to sort of cover it with a straight line, so I come in with a cotton bud and remove the paint while it's still wet, because I really want to retain that the red is creating the outer edge, not the greenish yellow, if that makes sense. I want the red to be sitting on top of the greenish yellow, not under it, if that makes sense. So I think this colour combination it's not a colour combination I've used before, but I think that they work very well together. The picture in the middle on the bottom row is the picture that I've been having problems with, and I end up just simplifying it down just to try and keep it as a set, because it's very messy in areas. There's too much black. I've went over that black while it's been wet, and it's just created, it's not even chaos, it's just very messy underneath the greenish yellow because of the smudging of the blacks that I've done. So it's important to dry your paint before you move on to the next stage. I love this one here. I love the sort of archways that have been created with the drips. So I'm going back in and adding in white in areas again, and that is just to tidy these up, try and see where we need quiet areas, where we need to balance darker areas. And I'm just using my finger to graduate that paint there to give the illusion of it blending into the red. So this is a good example. Basically, we had these two busy areas next to each other, and by removing one of those busy areas, it's really enhanced the lovely marks that were within one area, if that makes sense. It's like having a difference, and if there's lots of differences, then it's not a difference. And in some areas I'm doing the outside, and some areas I'm putting the white on the biggest, boldest shape. It's just what feels right in the picture. So this is the one that I had the red collage paper back onto. So I'm just enhancing these arches here because for me that is the focal point of this one. I really love them, and I feel like if I'd drawn that shape myself, that it wouldn't have the same look to it. It would feel forced. Whereas there, it feels almost like it's the legs of something that's alive, rather than, you know, a man-made arched tunnel. So the edges of the collage papers, I just gave them a little sand with sandpaper. And this is me deciding on their final placement. And I think these are lovely. I think I just love the boldness and the simplicity of the shapes. That's really my favourite thing about them. So that is us, and I just want to say thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like the colour scheme and the shapes, and I hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.